Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, back from vacation, not quite back into Pennsylvania quite yet. I'll be there next week. Currently broadcasting on remote location, I guess you could call it, down in Florida, enjoying some sunshine for a few more days, doing some family stuff down here. But back on board at Lions247.com. While I was away, Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan, Tyler Calvaruso had you covered with the latest information on Penn State football, recruiting, and what have you over at Lions247.com. Hopefully you followed our coverage along the way. Since this is our first episode in almost a couple of weeks, we're going to do our best to kind of bring everyone up to speed on some of that coverage. Daniel Gallen will join me in just a moment. After him, Tyler Calvaruso will hop on board with some notable recruiting developments that have happened while we were away. But as promised, we begin with some focus on this team, and as its progress continues towards spring practice, we're now just a couple weeks from getting back onto the practice field, seeing these Nittany Lions, kind of a reshaped roster, but a lot of familiar faces looking to make a national title run. Will be our first chance to see them on the field, putting in that kind of work since before the Fiesta Bowl and before the Orange Bowl. And Daniel, good to have you back on board. Since I was away, you had a chance to poke your head inside Penn State's weight room. You had a chance to hear from the czar of Penn State weightlifting, that is Chuck Losey, the director of performance enhancement. That's done a great job. He's a guy who took over for Dwight Galt a few years ago. People wondered what that program might look like moving ahead. It's done very well. I think we'll be reminded of that again come pro day for Penn State. We'll talk a little bit about what happened for this draft class for Penn State out of the combine. A lot was essentially left undone out there in Indianapolis, which means pro day is going to be a pretty big deal. We'll touch on some of that, along with NFL movement for former Nittany Lions standouts as free agency gets underway across the league. But Daniel, I think before we go any further, people want to hear what you have to say, because it's not just Beaver Stadium anymore. I was welcomed back to the beat. I popped my head in, and I thought he was joking. Mark was like, let's debate about the merits of renaming Beaver Stadium. And I was like, what happened? And you sent me the link that you had just published. I think it was Monday. So talk us through what you learned about this and what we need to know generally as Penn State takes a step into the future of college athletics.
Yeah, Tyler, you did an excellent job of keeping your head in the sand during your little time away to be completely oblivious to everything. I'm always envious when people can do that. But yeah, starting this year and for the next 15 years, it will be West Shore home field at Beaver Stadium. It's a 15-year, $50 million deal. It was framed by Penn State as a $50 million gift. It would be the second largest cash gift in Penn State history to name the field after West Shore home. People that have been following, Penn State and NIL and, developments over the past couple of years are probably familiar with West Shore home. BJ Wurzen is a 1999 graduate of Penn State. He's from Pennsylvania, founded West Shore home, I think in 2006. And they've been super active in terms of NIL deals and sponsoring different things. If you see the mic flags for press conferences, you see the West Shore home logo. I believe Franklin's headset on the sideline on game days has the West Shore home logo over the earpiece. So it's a company that Penn State and the athletic department has had a very deep relationship with, and this is more money to help pay for that $700 million renovation. Like that's a big chunk of change, and that money has to come from somewhere. You have to explore different avenues. We've seen the different gifts that have come in, and I was joking with Mark and you about how every single thing that's new is going to have a name, and it's kind of like these little nesting dolls where you go down to. It'll be like the such and such press box and the Pam Health Misitano Family Tower at West Shore home field at Beaver Stadium. But you have to pay for this stuff. I do think there is some conversation about the money and whether or not it's a good deal or not. The data that Pat Kraft presented to the Board of Trustees, it showed that this deal, which averages 3.3 million, is above market average for the pool of data that they were pulling from. But that was a lot of things that were 2023 and earlier. Pat Kraft said that West Shore home was the one serious proposal that they had for this. So I think that there's some interesting things there. But I was talking to Mark Brennan, and we were kind of like, you get $50 million to put some signage in, to add a couple extra lines to the game notes, and no one's going to call it West Shore home field at Beaver Stadium. It's still going to be Beaver Stadium, and you need to get that money from somewhere to pay for this. And I think overall, yeah, in 15 years, it's probably not going to look like a good deal, but none of these things always change over time. That's just what it is. Also, like, you're paying for the field, not the stadium names. So it makes sense, I think, with where this athletic department is right now.
It's become an avenue for financial gains across college football, college basketball world. You may have these storied stadiums and arenas for basketball, like Beaver Stadium, but you're calling the field something different. You're calling the court something different, but you're not impacting the name of the arena or the stadium. And I'm a little surprised we're not to the point where Stan Drayton isn't being introduced as a sponsored running backs coach. I think Joey Von Sider had so-and-so sponsoring the running backs coach job
the endowment,
at Notre Dame.
endowed
Right.
position coaches. Yeah, I assume that that's coming soon too.
I'd imagine that's coming down the pike, where we got a long title that ultimately means position coach, but because there's someone sponsoring it, essentially. Look, there's a lot of avenues for Penn State to kind of start exploring. I think they certainly have done many of those. When we heard from Pat Kraft a few weeks ago, he seemed very pleased with where things were trending from an NIL standpoint for Penn State's ability to take on the revenue sharing that's going to occur in the NCAA and strengthen a lot of different programs. Obviously, we're focused on football and basketball. So is Pat Kraft, but he's got a lot of others to manage. He talked about wrestling. He talked about volleyball, soccer, all the other types of things that he think will benefit. This is just a piece of the pie. And Pat Kraft has a deal that takes him into the 2030s. So he's always going to be thinking long-term with Penn State. We know this move probably ruffles some feathers. We don't have much else to say on it, though, to be honest, right now. I'm sure Mark Brennan will chime in when we get there. But turning the page and getting into off-season progress for Penn State. And again, it's not quite off-season because we're almost to seeing this team on the field. But it's been a little while since we've gotten a chance to see this team assemble together down in South Florida back in January. So who's evolving, who's been added that's making those key strides? Chuck Losey is a great guy to ask. You and Mark Brennan were there in the weight room as they were kind of starting to close out their winter workout program. And Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about the feedback on the transfers? It's a 6-man class, 2 of them at wide receiver. What did Chuck Losey have to say about this new group of college veterans?
Yeah, just to start with Losey, I mean, I know that Mark has talked about this in the past, about how, the first time we got to talk to Losey, I believe in 2022, it was a weird environment because we were in Haluba Hall at the temporary weight room setup, and it was loud, but it was clear that this was someone who was getting used to being, in front of us and in that type of environment. And now 3 years later, he opens his session with, I think, 7.5 minutes straight of just talking and running down the transfers that have stood out, or all 6 transfers, the early enrollees, breaking things down into different categories. And he probably gave us, 20 names by the time that first 7.5 minutes were done. And we were kind of joking where when he finished and they opened it up for questions, we were kind of like, we'd be done. Like, we could take all this now. Like, we have questions, but we'd be good. But no, I think to start with the transfers, I think the one name, or the 2 names that people are going to be the most interested in, are Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. Those are your transfer wide receivers. Hudson coming in from USC, Ross coming up from Troy. I think what Losey said, I'll start with Hudson because I think there's a little less to say there. Losey said Hudson is a pro mentality. He's got a vet presence, very mature, fluid, good football player. Hudson is someone who has spent 4 years. He's a redshirt senior. He was at USC. He's played in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. He's one of those players where he's one of those transfers where it's kind of like, what you're getting right now. He's the high floor edition. Ross, meanwhile, is the high ceiling edition, and the guy that is coming up from the Sun Belt, from Troy, that put up big numbers last year, over 1,000 yards receiving, 11 touchdown catches, had a huge game against Iowa back in September. And he was listed at 161 pounds on the Troy roster last year. Penn State listed him at 171 when he enrolled. Losey said that Ross is up 16 pounds right now, so I assume that would put him in that 177 range if he's going off of what he was listed at last year. And the one thing that Losey said that stood out about Ross is that he's taking advantage of what Penn State has to offer. And Losey said that it's no shade at Troy, and that Losey's worked at some of these lesser resource programs before, but there is a significant difference between being at a Sun Belt program, being at a Big Ten program, in terms of what is available to you and how you can benefit from that. I know it's a little bit different since it was FCS in the Patriot League to the Big Ten, but I remember Barney Amore, the punter, would rave about it. Like he would just go on and on and on about the just what he had access to as a football player here. And so Losey said that Ross knows that he's taking advantage of it, and that's really helping show with what he's doing in the workouts and how he's changing his body right now to get ready for spring ball, to get ready for a Big Ten schedule.
I want to make something very clear because I think that there is a part of this listening audience and a part of the Penn State fan base that thinks every single March we hear a bunch of smoke blown up about the transfer players. Like that's not the case, especially with Chuck Losey. He gives you what he's got, and he's not really going to give you something beyond that just to sugarcoat the situation. And so we've also heard him talk about transfers who have come to campus and have a lot of ground to make up. Maybe they weren't in the best program before they got here, and because of that they were a few months behind the rest of that transfer class. So to hear him give this kind of feedback, which we've also heard with some internal conversations, which we've also heard with some on the record conversations in recent weeks about these receivers, and I think that's also been confirmed by Marcus Hagans, who we haven't had a chance to interview yet, Daniel, but those transfers are where he was looking during winter workouts.
Yeah. I think that these wide receivers, they have a lot ahead of them, I think. And I got sidetracked thinking about your point about Chuck Losey doesn't necessarily blow smoke all the time. I was looking at his other quotes, and he mentioned TJ.
Let me just say, he wasn't raving about Dante Cephas being, he wasn't telling us that Dante Cephas was going to come in and attack Penn State defensive backs and dominate the field. He wasn't telling us that Malik McLean was going to show up and be 1,000-yard receiver. I just feel like some people think that everyone internally at Penn State is always telling us there's going to be this great impact from the transfer. I will say this group is probably the most positive we've heard about incoming transfer receivers going back to probably Mitch Tinsley in 2022, when I think he was second on the team or first on the team, maybe by the end of it, in catches during that Rose Bowl run.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that to your point with Losey, I mean, he was talking about TJ Shanahan, the Texas A&M transfer lineman, and pretty massaged it a little bit, but put it out there that there's what do you call it? He said some some composition reformation on him, and then with Anai White, he said that there needs to be speed and strength development. So yeah, I think that with what we heard from Losey and with these guys, that this is really positive. And I think that if you're a Penn State fan and you're looking for a good sign, you're looking for something to hang your hat on with these receivers. I know that for a lot of people, they're waiting until August 30th, September 6th, September 13th, all those Saturdays. But I think right now what we're hearing ahead of spring ball, ahead of our first chance to see these guys in action, is positive. And I think that it's positivity that you can really put stock into and maybe hold on to for a little while.
There's going to be a lot of people who won't buy stock in this receiver group until they go to Columbus next fall and get it done. But
November 1st.
Stepping stones are required between now and then, that's for sure. Beyond those transfers who came, and as you said, 6 of them came on board this winter, getting acclimated with the program. We'll see how things turn out. Looking back to last season, by the time you got into the playoff run for Penn State, you had 3 transfer players, 2 at cornerback, 1 at offensive tackle, in starting roles for the Nittany Lions. So it can be a very important group for this team. But the freshmen, look, the last couple of years, you haven't seen a big wave of freshman impact like we did in 2022. That class has obviously proven itself to be very special. If those players have gone on to develop into team veterans, NFL draft prospects. But this class, look, you have such a and this isn't unique anymore, but you have such a large group that gets to campus, when they're supposed to be high school seniors. Many of them practice with this team during the playoffs. First time we saw that. So in my mind, this freshman group that assembled, and some of them later in December, they should be ahead of the curve compared to a lot of the groups we've seen by the time they get onto the practice field later this month. When Chuck Losey directed his attention toward those newcomers, the freshman class, what were the names that particularly piqued your interest?
Yeah, Losey was asked what the benefit of having these guys, with the team for the bowl prep and playoff prep, I guess, the benefit of it. He said they came back 10 days ahead of where they would have been, and a lot of that has to do with paperwork. He was like, honestly, like, there's a lot of paperwork. You have to do physicals, a lot of stuff that takes time, and so they were able to get that done in December, get these guys on the field, and come back and don't have to worry about it in January. I think looking at the early enrollees, the first guy he mentioned, we're going to talk about in the next segment about winter workouts. But I do think it was notable that he mentioned Penn State's top 2 rated recruits who are on campus right now. Andrew Olish, he said he's up 17 pounds, exceptional mover, great ball skills. And he said that development is size and strength, which when you talk about being a tight end at Penn State and what that requires, you need a lot of size and a lot of strength to do that. And we know what Olish's profile was coming out of Southern Lehigh. Darius Dixon, the cornerback, from Mater Day all the way in Santa Ana, California. Losey said that he's mature, coachable, smart, and athletic. And I think to hear that from 2 of the guys that had a lot of attention on them, that people were really excited to get in the class, to get that early feedback, I think is really positive from Losey. We also heard about a wide receiver, which I think that will also catch people's attention. Kobe Howard, someone who battled injuries during his high school career, and I think that helped him fly a little bit more under the radar. Losey said that he's unbelievably strong and powerful. He also brought up his work ethic. He said that there's a 7 a.m. lift group 3 times a week for the freshmen, and Kobe Howard's the first one in the building for all of those days. So I think when you talk about guys coming in with a lot of attention on them, guys coming in who might have the chance to contribute this year, maybe might be a couple years down the road. I think to hear these names, I think is a positive. And then the last one I'll add is Ivan Kamaju. That's someone that I think I know that Tyler Calvaruso is really high on him and what he brings and what his potential could be. And Losey called him a monster and has a monster work ethic. So I think that too, he's someone who is intriguing. You talk about the trenches. It might take a little bit longer to be able to get into a position to contribute, but for being on campus for a couple months, that's good. And he also mentioned Mike Troutman, the offensive lineman.
Yeah, Kamaju is a guy the staff thought was generally underrated nationally as a recruit. I'd probably say the offensive guy they would look toward would be Tyke Hayes, who we're going to get to in a moment. One name that you didn't mention there, but I know that Chuck Losey brought up, and you talked about the weight gain already for Olish, who I believe was announced as a newcomer at 6'5", 210. So it sounds like he may be pushing towards 230 pounds before he gets out there for spring ball. We know that Luke Reynolds, as a former 5-star tight end recruit, he put on 35 pounds, 40 pounds last year as a freshman. Beckham Kritz, though, is a guy that you meet him, you shake his hand, you've seen pictures of him, you realize he's got some frame to build. He's 6'5", maybe plus, maybe beyond that, but came to campus sub 200 pounds. We heard from this coaching staff they think he can put on 40 to 50 pounds during his first couple of years on campus. They think he may have the best raw arm talent in the entire 2025 quarterback recruiting class. We've gone over his story quite a bit. You check the high school resume, it doesn't necessarily match up with what you might expect from a Penn State quarterback signee, especially the movement across college football. Essentially having to change squads as a senior to be in a starting role as a quarterback down there in Florida. But here he is. We got eyes on him on campus just a couple of weeks ago during a Thon event. And, it's very easy to tell that, there's a long way to go for Beckham Kritza. What did Chuck Losey say about that opportunity?
Yeah, I actually asked Losey about Beckham, and I framed it with what Kenny Sanders said on signing day in terms of, we're going to add 40 pounds to this guy. He's going to be 230, 6'5", 230. When I asked Losey, he kind of smirked a little bit, and he knew what he had been listening, so he knew what I was talking about. And it was, I was talking to Mark Brennan about it, and Mark was like, Losey kind of framed it as a challenge to him to develop Beckham Kritza. He called him a clean slate, and he said, quote, "If Beckham is not where he needs to be a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, then from a developmental standpoint, it's my fault." So I think that Losey is looking at this as challenge. Now we know that Kritza is a bit of a project because of that frame that he needs to fill out, because of the lack of reps that he had, the lack of experience. He's going to need to round out his game in a couple different areas. But Losey said that Kritz is doing everything that he's been asked to do so far, and that he's taking advantage of the resources that he has at Penn State, which is another thing when you talk about someone who's bounced around a lot in his high school career, to be have his feet planted in one place and really be able to embrace what is there. That's also something that can help and be a factor. So I think that Kritza, I don't think we're going to see him on the field this fall, or if we do, something went potentially went pretty wrong. But I think that it's going to be interesting when we see him, for the first time in pads in a couple weeks versus when we get to November and December and we're getting our practice windows. How different is he going to look from that physical standpoint?
The clock is officially ticking toward the post Drew Aller world for Penn State. We know that one way or another, he's moving on after this season. What that competition looks like in the aftermath remains to be seen. We'll see what Beckham Kritza can accomplish in this year on campus. He's got spring ball. He'll have preseason camp. And then we'd imagine he'll probably settle into more of a scout team role during the season if those other quarterbacks are available. Jackson Smolik, Ethan Grunkemeyer. You mentioned that Chuck Losey had 3 key categories: consistency, growth, and leadership. And he mentioned some specific names that I guess fit into those descriptors. What can you share about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't read this on Lions 24/7 yet, I would suggest going pulling it up, because I I broke these down into a couple different posts, and I think seeing it, all the names listed out, really gives you an idea of how in depth Losey went. But yeah, to start with the leadership part, I thought that the first 3 names he mentioned were Zane Durant, Deni Dennis Sutton, and Zachy Wheatley. Durant and Dennis Sutton, we know that those are going to be 2 really key guys for this defense, especially one that is losing 9 of its top 20 snap takers. I guess from last year, there's a lot of playing time up for grabs, a lot of young guys who are going to be in new positions. You need to have that leadership. And then the Wheatley comments were really interesting. Losey said that there was a point where Zachy Wheatley was not a hard worker. And last January, his work ethic really flipped. And I think that goes back to what James Franklin said last spring, where I think the quote was, "The light has gone on." For Wheatley. And we saw that, I think, last fall with how he played, how he adjusted to his role changing once KJ Winston got hurt. It was really impressive. And then the last 4 names you mentioned for leadership: Drew Aller, Drew Shelton, Dom DeLuca, Nick Dawkins. No surprises there. You got your quarterback, you got your left tackle, and then you got 2 team captains. The consistency part, I thought was interesting too. Nick Singleton, Cooper Cousins, Luke Reynolds, Vanga Ioane, Liam Clifford, and then all of the quarterbacks. I think that's what you want to hear, especially when it comes to the quarterbacks and their role on the team. I think with Clifford, that's kind of what we know about him, where he's really steady, and that is what he brings to that room. And then Singleton, Cousins, Reynolds, Ioane, those are guys that are going to have roles this year, one way or another. With Reynolds, he said that there's a template for him with what Tyler Warren did over these past 5 years, and Reynolds is following it to a T so far. So I think that's more positive feedback on Lou Reynolds. And then I won't go through all the names on the, when you talk about the growth, maturity, guys who are trending, which is how it was framed by Losey, because there's a lot. And he mentioned a lot of offensive linemen, which is really interesting when you consider the mouths that they're going to have to feed, and the way that Phil Troutman's going to have to juggle things. He said there's been a gear shift in Javen Williams, and then 2 other guys from that class of 2023 that we haven't talked about much or haven't come up much: Alex Birchmeyer and Chimdi Ono. I thought my ears kind of perked up when Losey mentioned them, because we don't see them very often. We don't hear about them very often. But he said that Ono has developed toughness and that both of them have been studs. But I think the 2 names that are really going to stand out for people from this section that Losey talked about are Elliott Washington and Zariah Fisher. With Elliott Washington, there's a corner job open opposite AJ Harris going into this year. Jalen Kimber's gone. There's playing time there. Washington did carve out some playing time later last season, but got dinged up against Purdue and never really returned to the full complement that he was playing before. He was banged up. Losey called him a high horsepower guy, and he understands the role and understands what that opportunity is ahead for him. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, you look at Washington and you can see that he's someone who was built for this type of environment in the offseason and can do some things on the field. And then Zariah Fisher, you talk about Abdul Carter leaving. There's a defensive end job that is open. And the snaps available even went up with Smith Vilbert leaving. So, Fisher coming off an injury, he's going to be in year 6. And Losey said he's the oldest guy in the group. He needs to be the one to set the lead, and he understands the expectations that are there for him. So I think when you talk about that group, it is it's interesting. And then the last one that was really effusive. He had more good things to say about Luke Reynolds, but he was really effusive about Quentin Martin. He said that Quentin Martin is dialed in right now, and he understands the player he wants to be. And this season, Martin doesn't want to be watching with Losey on the sideline. He wants to be on the field, making things happen. And obviously, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who Losey said is having his best winter, obviously they're coming back. But those are two guys that are going to have their eyes on the NFL. They're two guys that you want to get through a season healthy at this point in their careers, because you have this playoff run on the back end. So I think there will be some opportunities for Quentin Martin.
Yeah, one of the more compelling position battles beyond the starting lineup is for that RB3 job, because again, the clock's ticking officially with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. We thought that might end this past winter. It wasn't the case. And so guys like Quentin Martin have another year to make up some ground and show what they're all about. I wanted to get into just a few more winter workout updates as we kind of, again, start to turn the page towards spring practices. Penn State's on spring break currently. The players have spent the last couple of weeks putting in some early morning action at Haluba Hall. One of the more arduous events on the calendar for Penn State are these winter workouts. Players talk about the challenges and also kind of the bonds that are created and learning a little bit about some of your teammates, some of the newer guys. And Daniel, Luke Reynolds got 3 out of the 4 nods at tight end. I kind of look across the board here a little bit. I see Peter Gonzalez popped up with getting a nod at wide receiver. That's a nice indication for him as a second-year wide receiver who lost his freshman season due to an injury. What stands out to you, whether it's just what I brought up or generally you were the one documenting that when I was away last week? So what are some of the highlights from what we have gathered from winter workouts?
Yeah, I think we'll start with one guy we just talked about with Elliott Washington. He went 4 for 4 for the winter workouts, which obviously they typically do more, but with the condensed schedule between the college football playoff run and trying to get guys healthy and managing this offseason, they did 4. And I don't think I'd seen no one had swept in the 4 years I've been doing this. So I thought that was impressive. And it goes back to what Chuck Losey said about Washington recognizing that opportunity. Tyke Hayes was the first freshman mentioned. And you talked about him as someone that the staff feels is underrated. And Losey also mentioned him among the early enrollees. He was actually the first early enrollee that Losey said when he was going through that list. He said that Tyke Hayes has been incredibly impressive so far. He's wired right. Everything he does is important to him. So I think that when you talk about being in that running back room, all the talent is there. I think that's the approach that you need to have as a young player.
Daniel, let's just remind our listeners, he's one of 4 running backs who have freshman designation this year. It's him. You'll have Jabri Wallace-Coleman making his way from Philadelphia soon. And then the 2 guys who took red shirts last year, Corey Smith, who got some run later in the year, Quentin Martin, who was more involved early in the year. And then in recovery mode right now is Cam Wallace, who's a redshirt sophomore. So a lot to figure out about that group. And so for Tyke Hayes to come in and kind of build his case early and kind of have some buzz brewing right now, I think says a lot about the way he approached this transition. Sorry if you wanted to get somewhere else. I just wanted to, again, give the full scope of what Hayes is encountering. There is no clear path toward that RB3 job among this unit.
Yeah, that's a really competitive room with a lot of young guys, and a couple guys in Martin and Smith and Wallace who got a little taste of what the action is like last year. Yeah, I mean, Luke Reynolds, I think that he's been a stud in terms of the offseason development these past 2 years since he's been on campus. And then Xavier Gilliam on the defensive line, he got two of the nods there. Losey was asked about the defensive tackles pretty generally and said that they all want to play and they know what is ahead of them. They know the snaps that are available with everyone who moved on after last year. And so there's good competition there. And I think that seeing Gilliam mentioned matches up with what Gilliam said when we talked to him last month about how determined he is to make an impact and how determined he is to get onto the field. And he wants to play. He went through everything last year. Redshirted, got a little action here and there. He wants to be out there. He wants to be in the rotation, and he wants to show to the coaches that he can do that.
And we'll have plenty more to discuss about 2025 development for Penn State as we set the table for spring practices as this month continues and we actually get back on the field. But before we hop over to some recruiting conversation with Tyler Calvaruso and catch up on some things in that department, I wanted to finish out with you, Daniel, by taking a look at Penn State players either trying to break through into the NFL or trying to figure out what's next for them at the professional ranks. Let's begin with some takeaways from the NFL Combine out in Indianapolis. We did a bit of a preview for that last time we were on this podcast. It has come and gone since then. And I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of get your popcorn ready commentary for the upcoming Pro Day, which is going to occur in Haluba Hall in Happy Valley this month.
Yeah, Haluba Hall, Pro Day later this month is going to be a scene. I think when you talk about the guys that are going to be there working out, and what their potential is to do. I know that the Micah Parsons or Dafe Owe Pro Day, that was during COVID, so we weren't there. We were all watching on Big Ten Network. Didn't get that chance to see I think the 4.36 or whatever Micah ran in person. But we'll be there for Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren. Neither of them tested in Indianapolis. Carter had a foot injury pop up, but it looks like he is going to go through it. It's a stress fracture, I believe, or a stress reaction. Is how it was worded by NFL insiders. And he said that he thinks he deserves to be the number one pick, that he believes he's the best player in the nation, and it should be reflected on draft night. Obviously, quarterback value is the one thing that throws the wrench in there and what teams need. But yeah, I think that Carter is someone who is going to have the opportunity to do some big things if you are on Pro Day. Out at the combine, Jalen Reed was the only one who tested. KJ Winston is coming off of that partially torn ACL. Kobe King only did drills. Warren and Carter didn't do anything. Here in a 4.49, which is a great time for him. I think the framing for him was always about his mind and how he was a cerebral player, and that's really where he got his advantage. So, and that showed up on tape with where he was able to be, what he was able to do. But you combine that with running sub 4.5 and putting that on paper, putting that on film for NFL teams. I think that changes how you view Reed a little bit. So I'm really curious to see where he goes. Does he sneak into that day 2 conversation? He's going to be a fun one to follow, I think. And it'll be interesting if he stands on that time from the combine, or if he tries to improve on it at Pro Day on a home track on what is traditionally a fast track at Haluba Hall.
Well, getting that first contract, huge deal. And a lot of these guys are going to get that chance next month when the draft takes place in Green Bay in late April. But the veterans in the league and the guys who have gone through will tell you the second contract is the biggest deal. And we've got some Penn State players coming up in that territory, or it's their third or fourth contract. And just want to kind of review the veteran market as Penn State players, kind of navigate the NFL reality right now. And it's a good reality for Saquon Barkley, who just helped lead the Philadelphia Eagles to a Super Bowl championship. No running back in NFL history has ever put together more rushing yards in a season when you combine the regular season and playoff run that he had. And the Philadelphia Eagles were very quick to reward him. Quickly, Daniel, what do you make of Saquon Barkley and the Eagles 1 year after he signs this lucrative deal, coming back to the bargaining table and making sure he walks away happy?
Yeah, the numbers on this are really eye-popping, for a running back. $20 million a year, the first running back in NFL history to make that much money. And you saw what he did last year, and he's worth that much. I know that we talk about running back valuation, and I was someone who last year when Barkley initially signed that contract, like given my familiarity with the Eagles and the NFL, my eyebrows went up a little bit. And Barkley was definitely worth more than the, I think, 13 million that he made last year. So yeah, I think that is great for him. He talked about it at a news conference on Monday that he wants to see other running backs in the NFL break that mark, that he wants to be kind of a trendsetter, and to bring guys along and help this position that where guys have been underpaid for a long time realize their monetary potential in the NFL.
A couple of former Penn State pass catchers who did some really good things alongside each other as Nittany Lions, Mike Gesicki, Chris Godwin. They're staying put with the teams that they spent the 2024 season with. They're getting rewarded quite well to do that. Mike Gesicki gets a 3-year deal worth more than $25 million from the Cincinnati Bengals, where he really emerged as a key component for one of the league's most feared passing attacks last year. He was third on the Bengals in receptions and touchdown catches, or receptions and receiving yards last year. Got to the end zone a couple times, and certainly a key compliment for Joe Burrow. It's a guy that has looked for stability in his career. He was with the Miami Dolphins. They had some coaching changes. They had a quarterback change, went to the New England Patriots a couple years ago during probably the most challenging season for that franchise. And ultimately, we saw Mike Gesicki have his lowest production since his second year in the league, back when he was with the Patriots in 2023. So really cool to see him bounce back, gets rewarded on the back end. If you add this contract to what he's already accrued to this point in his career, Gesicki, who will turn 30 years old in October, is looking at a $50 million career at the end of this contract if it plays out that way over the next 3. And then Chris Godwin, coming off a serious injury, gets a deal with the Buccaneers. Again, a 3-year contract. And Daniel, this is a guy that I think Mike Evans has a lot of the attention down there. He's put together a Hall of Fame career, but you look at the years they had with Tom Brady, won a Super Bowl together down there. Godwin's been, banged up here and there. He's missed chunks of time, which hasn't been the case for Mike Evans. But when available, he has been one of the most productive receivers in the league since he got to Tampa. And it's hard to remember that he was pretty devalued in the draft. He's the guy that I think a lot of Penn State fans fell too far in that draft in 2017. And I think that he's proven that is certainly the case, and getting rewarded with a 3-year contract in Tampa. I don't have the money in front of me, but maybe you know it off the top of your head, because I think you put together that article.
Yeah, Godwin, it's 3 years, $66 million, so $22 million annually. And the framing from NFL media in the report was that Godwin left money on the table to stick in Tampa Bay. I mean, he's already made $80 million in his career up to this point. But yeah, I mean, Godwin, like, it's kind of crazy. Like, he's going into year 9. He is someone who has gotten into the NFL and carved out a niche and really stayed productive. He's flown under the radar a little bit when you talk about what Mike Evans has done and some of the personalities he's played with at quarterback, the attention that Jameis Winston, Tom Brady, and now Baker Mayfield, garner. It's, he can just fly under the radar and do his thing. Gesicki, it's good for him. I mean, you take that 1-year, $3 million prove it deal, and Cincinnati decides they want to keep you around. He was cracking some jokes at his press conference where, the Bengals, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, those guys need new contracts. And, he's kind of like, he knows that people are kind of like, him, they're taking care of him right now. But, I thought it was funny, some good self-awareness from Gesicki. But, he found a role there. The Bengals, rolled through, a couple different tight ends. Eric All, the former Michigan and Iowa tight end, is there. Drew Sample was there. Those guys were, I think, used a little bit more in blocking roles, and Gesicki was there in a receiving role. And going through snap counts, there were a decent number of games where Gesicki had the 3rd most snaps among the Bengals tight ends. But even in that limited playing time, he was productive, and Joe Burrow was looking for him, and he was making plays.
Yeah, and by the way, at the tight end position, someone who didn't play that spot here at Penn State, but Juwan Johnson, you may remember that name, walk-off touchdown on the road at Iowa in 2017. Didn't blow up the way we thought he might. Finished his career at Oregon after earning a Penn State degree. He has shown staying power in the NFL at the tight end position. He agreed to a 3-year contract worth about $30 million to stick with the New Orleans Saints. And I think you review his stats, couple seasons out of the last 3, he's over 500 receiving yards. Not the kind of career that we probably envisioned for Juwan Johnson. And I think we would say the same thing about Will Fries You've got to tip your cap to this guy. 5-year contract with the Minnesota Vikings, valued at nearly $90 million. We'll see what the nuts and bolts of that deal it looked like, but it's a big contract for Will Fries, who was part of an offensive line here at Penn State that was routinely viewed as an Achilles heel. He was one of the better members of that offensive line. He played guard, he played tackle, he played a lot of ball for Penn State, but he kind of wore that stink like a lot of those linemen did. Moving on, I think a lot of fans figured there wouldn't be a lot of lengthy NFL careers for many of those offensive linemen. Will Fries gets to the Indianapolis Colts as a round 7 pick, works his way into that starting lineup, and now parlays that into a fat contract with the Minnesota Vikings. So I think between the Juwan Johnson update there and the Will Fries update there and the amount of money we're talking about, a couple of surprises maybe for people considering how they viewed those two players when they stopped playing at Penn State.
Yeah, that salary cap keeps going up, and NFL teams still need to spend that money. I think the guard market has also really taken off in the past 2 years. It's Wednesday morning, and Fries agreed to this deal yesterday morning, and I've been looking and haven't seen the breakdown yet on how many years is this actually worth, how much money is this actually worth. But I think when you put 5 years, $88 million for a former 7th round pick, who you mentioned was had some good moments in college, but was part of an overall unit that had some issues, that's pretty cool. It's a good story, and he's going to a franchise in the Vikings that wants to compete and is doing a little bit of an offseason overhaul with their cap space to put themselves in position. He's going to be blocking for JJ McCarthy next year, most likely. A young quarterback who Minnesota wants to take them to that next step. So I think really cool for Fries and Johnson. That's a neat story for figuring out how you can stick in the NFL and then staying put and finding a team that you can do some good things for.
And at the other end of this profession, guys get shown the exit door. That is the case for Miles Sanders right now. He'll be looking for his 3rd NFL franchise. He was able to get a really solid free agency deal a couple of years ago, leaving the Philadelphia Eagles, going to the Carolina Panthers. Not much has worked out for him with Carolina. Not much has worked out for Carolina in the last about decade, it feels like. But he's going to be looking for a new home. They had Chuba Hubbard take on a big role in their running back room last year. They also drafted a player in day 2 last year. So the writing was kind of on the wall. We'll see what Miles Sanders can do with this opportunity, Daniel. He's a guy that you covered for a bit with the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, I covered him here with Penn State. Around here, he's probably best known as the player who followed Saquon Barkley at running back. He was a 5-star recruit coming out of the Pittsburgh area. What would you assess is the next move for Miles Sanders based on what he's done to this point in his career and what might be available to him before we switch gears and get over to Tyler Calvaruso on some recruiting?
Yeah, I think Sanders is at an interesting point in his career. But the way that NFL teams work is that a lot of these teams want to play a lot of different running backs, and rotate guys through, have that running back by committee. So I think that there will be a team out there that will look at him and say, yeah, you can come be our number 2 or number 3 back. I know that he has a lot of pride. That was the one thing that I really took away from my interactions with him in the 2 years I covered him in Philly, is that he's really confident in his abilities, had a lot of pride in himself, and what he felt he was able to do, the type of player he felt that he was. But that situation in Carolina, I always thought it was going to be tough. Doesn't help when you're battling injuries through that and are working through some things. But he got $13 million guaranteed, I believe, when he signed that contract. That's life-changing money for someone. And I think that he's someone who still has some tread on the tire. He was never really the feature back with the Eagles until his last year there. Given the other backs that he played with and how they managed their roster. So I think that he probably has a couple years left and can make himself some more money. Maybe rebuild his value a little bit. Put himself in a position where he can compete, especially as you see guys like Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, some other running backs have success in their later 20s into their 30s.
Sanders will turn 28 years old in May. Had a almost 1,300-yard season with the Philadelphia Eagles back in 2022, about 5 yards per carry. Then 27 total games with the Carolina Panthers, under 700 total rushing yards in that Panthers uniform. Daniel, we covered a lot of ground here. It's kind of necessary to do when we take a week off for vacation on the podcast. But thanks for helping us. We'll get back next week with kind of our regular programming, a couple episodes. We'll start to set that stage, like we said, for spring ball. But thanks so much for helping us play catch up here.
Appreciate it, Tyler. Glad you're back, at least in this capacity.
That's right. Talk to you soon. Let's get over to Tyler Calvaruso now, because as promised, there was some recruiting happenings that went down while we were away. And welcome back, Tyler. Good to hear from you.
Well, welcome back to you, man. Oh, it was a good trip down there. But no, I'm happy to be back here with you.
It's been a good trip. Still got a few more days here in Florida for some family stuff. I'll be joining you back up in Pennsylvania. I'm fully expecting winter to be over by then. But until we get to that point, Tyler, I would love to start with a loss for this recruiting class. It's not necessarily the news that anyone wants to talk about right now in Nittany Lions Nation, and it's not the most timely news because it went down right when I was going away, but we haven't talked about it on the podcast. Penn State lost a really impressive receiver from his 2026 unit.
Yeah, Connor Salmon went off the board to Clemson. Clemson really cleaned up this past weekend. And, not to turn this into the Clemson 24/7 podcast real quick, but they have two really big recruiting weekends down there. It's the Elite Retreat Junior Day that they had this past weekend, and it's their one official visit weekend during the summer. And Elite Retreat, they get a lot of their top guys on campus, and they push in a similarly impactful way to the manner in which Penn State pushes. They say, hey, look, if you want to be here, make sure, because they want to get guys locked in and, fully on board. And that's what they were able to do with Connor Salmon, who was a top of the board target for Penn State wide receiver. Really impressive prospect, fast kid, the kind of player who really could have helped Penn State at receiver. There's still plenty of talent on the board beyond Salmon, but seeing him go to Clemson before getting the chance to get him back for an official visit, it's disappointing.
Yeah, and you stack that, Tyler, on top of what was the setback for this receiver class. So Salmon off the board, number 146 overall in the nation, number 19 at wide receiver. The stats aren't quite, or the rankings aren't quite as gaudy at this point for Jaquaden Guilford. I'm going the wrong name here. Penn State loses a commitment, and can you get into that for us? Because Guilford is a guy who, again, doesn't have those rankings. And I know I kind of threw you a curveball. I was referencing him when I talked about the guy who walked away, because I think his decommitment literally happened on my first day of vacation. Big framed wide receiver from Fort Wayne, Indiana, had spent several months committed to this program, and he seems to be a guy that's really been on the rise. You've been wondering if he might poke his head around and look elsewhere. Clearly, he's going to give that a shot.
Well, you know how it is in recruiting, man. It feels like his decommitment took place like a year ago. So much
I know.
So much just happened, man. But yeah, this was a player who me and you discussed frequently as underrated in terms of rankings. We both thought he was a big time talent. And, he's going to be seeking opportunities elsewhere. Penn State is still under consideration. Take that for what you will. It's always tough to reel a guy back in after he opens back up. You see it sometimes. It directly impacted Penn State a couple cycles ago when Nick Marsh was committed to Michigan State, wound up back on the market. Penn State had a pretty serious flirtation there. He wound up back in Michigan State in the end. So you've seen some guys circle back in the past. I'm not quite sure if that's going to happen with Guilford. And look, he's a really good player. It's a blow to the wide receiver room. It was a strong trio with Guilford, Jasir Rogers, and LeVar Keys on board. Now it's a strong duo. Of the three, Guilford might have been the best one, in my opinion. I think he has that level of big-time talent, which says a lot because I'm pretty high on Jasir Rogers as well, him being a key contributor for some point at Penn State. But Guilford's opening back up. You've got schools like Notre Dame, Michigan, Tennessee, Indiana, a bunch more jumping in the mix. Missouri's one that just offered and is catching Guilford's eye. So a lot of new options there for Guilford. It was really just a matter of, hey, look, feeling was you went a little bit too early. Winter contact period brought about some new options that he wants to explore. And he decided, open back up, back off that Penn State commitment, see what's out there. And, if the Nittany Lions are able to get that June official visit, that would be big. But right now, he seems pretty open to all of these new options that have been kind of tossed his way throughout the last month and a half to maybe even 2 months.
So Guilford, now parting ways with Penn State. You've got one of your key targets in Connor Salmon, who was down in Virginia. Now he's in Maryland for high school. He is, at least for the time being, off the board. Where are we in evaluating Marcus Hagans as this 2026 recruiting cycle marches on? As you mentioned, a couple guys are still committed at this position. They've got a couple transfers that are expected to make an immediate impact. We just discussed them a bit with Daniel Gallen, but this is his third year. This is his room. I mean, we talked about it a couple of years ago. He inherited a lot of pieces. This is his room at this point, right? I think Liam Clifford's the only player that he didn't personally bring to campus. I guess you could also say Caden Saunders and Anthony Ivey, who are now in their fourth years. He did not personally bring them to campus, but this is now a lot of based on his evaluation, based on his development. And so before we can get to that 2025 season, which we think is going to be very important for Marcus Hagans and his future at Penn State, how are things going in the 2026 recruiting trail, and what did the events of the last 2 weeks do to your impression of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's his room. It's on his shoulders, especially on the developmental front, and that carries over to the recruiting trail. I still think Penn State has the ability to go out and get a top flight receiver in this 26 cycle. They're still in it with Messiah Hampton, who is now a top 24/7 prospect here on our end. They're still in it with Davion Brown, who has been solidified as one of the top receivers in the nation out of Virginia. And they're still in it with Travis Johnson out of Virginia, who Hagans has known pretty much forever. I mean, he has a good relationship with that family. Hagans was recruiting his older brother, who now plays at West Virginia, during his stint as the receivers coach at UVA. And, the fact of the matter is, though, there's work to do on all three of those guys. And there was work to do with Salmon as well, but now he's off the board and likely, given the way Clemson approaches things, it's probably not going to circle back. So there's still work for Hagans to do on the trail this cycle. There's no doubt about it. I think, some people might look at the rankings of Rogers and Keys and question what's been accomplished this cycle. I think those guys are frankly better than the rankings indicate. So I'd say he's already done a solid job of compiling talent in this 26 class, but you still got to go out and get that top flight guy. The fact of the matter is, no matter what my opinion is, no matter what your opinion is, the fan base is going to continue to judge him on his ability to go get a top flight guy, a guy who shines in the rankings, a guy who's, that top 100, top 150 level player, because that's what garners the most eyeballs. That's just how it goes. And it's still possible he can bring in that kind of guy, but there's still work to be done. He did it last cycle, going out and getting Matthew Outen. Now it's on him to develop him. It's on him to develop guys like Outen, Lyric Samuel, Kobe Howard, Jeff Exner once he arrives on campus. So there's a lot of weight, I think, on Marcus Hagans' shoulders heading into year 3, right? Year 3 on the staff here at Penn State. And the recruiting results, we'll see where things are after official visit season. I think the majority of this class in general is going to play itself out during official visit season, and that definitely applies to the receiver recruiting.
Well, there was also a second Clemson recruiting victory that impacted Penn State negatively, and that was a top safety target, Caden Gebhardt out of Olentangy High School in Ohio, former high school teammate with current Nittany Lions quarterback Ethan Grunkemeyer, a frequent visitor to here to Happy Valley, a guy that I know Tyler Calvaruso has caught up a bunch of times. He is committed to Clemson now, and that happened on Tuesday. And so, look, this is a fresh one. I'm assuming you're still getting your information on this one. Any surprise on the timing of Gebhardt's announcement and that he never ultimately made it back to Penn State?
Timing maybe, but I'm not surprised with the end destination. This was one where we always talk about relationships matter, and they definitely mattered here. I mean, Tom Allen going to Clemson and offering Gebhardt completely changed the dynamic of this recruitment in the end. There was a point in mid-December when Gebhardt was getting back to Penn State for the SMU playoff game. I was close to putting a crystal ball pick in for the Nittany Lions. And I think if Allen had remained in place as defensive coordinator, had he not decided to go down to Clemson, I think there's every chance Gebhardt's part of the class right now. That's how high he was on his Allen, the relationship with Allen, and the scheme fit in Allen's defense. And there's a lot of talk about him playing a linebacker role in Allen's defense. That's what's going to happen at Clemson. It's just there was a point where it looked like Penn State's main competition was going to be Ohio State. That's why I didn't put the pick in, because I wanted to see where things were going to go with Ohio State, given that's right in Gebhardt's backyard. But I don't think anyone could have predicted Allen going to Clemson and that having that kind of impact on Gebhardt's recruitment because you can't predict what's going to happen before it happens sometimes. Even though recruiting, we try our best, that relationship, we didn't know it was going to be taken off the table. And that was really the driving force in this one. Gebhardt, I'll also mention, I mean, he's just an overall fit at Clemson, I believe, with the way Dabo Swinney does things down there, his personality. I think he's a culture fit down there in addition to the obvious fit with Allen. So it's a tough pill to swallow because had things played out a little bit differently, maybe he's on board in this Penn State class right now. Maybe he's on board in that Penn State class coming out of the spring. Now, there were conversations with Gebhardt where he was considering wrapping up his recruitment in January, February. Obviously pushed that out a little bit longer. Now he's part of Clemson's class. Life goes on the safety board. There are still some quality names there, guys who are outside of the region as well that Penn has a legitimate chance at. So still plenty of work for Anthony Poindexter to do, but now you cross Gebhardt off the list, which is, again, the timing. I don't think anyone could have seen it coming this soon. There was always some talk about it, but for it to actually come to fruition, I thought they were going to get him back on campus during the spring a couple of times like he was scheduled.
The fact that you say that Tom Allen moved the needle so much for him with that move to Clemson, and you mentioned him being in Ohio State's backyard, and they just won a national championship, and their defensive coordinator just came to Penn State and got the highest paid deal ever for that coordinator. It tells me that it's going beyond just who do I want to play for defensive coordinator. Now, obviously, that rapport is there with Tom Allen. I can't speak to any rapport he may or may not have had with Jim Knowles from the time on Ohio State staff, but I think it's fair to say that this wasn't just Tom Allen totally changing the tide of this. This was also Clemson as a university, Dabo Swinney as a head coach, and being able to kind of entrench themselves near the top of this recruitment and get to the finish line. I think the way you explained it was fair. I just think for our listening audience, it may walk away scratching their head saying, so you're telling me Tom Allen was the entire difference here? And I don't think it's that simple though, right?
No, it's not, because look, you could have the greatest relationship with the coach of all time. And Gebhardt's Clemson offer came in January. He visited shortly after. He could have went to Clemson and just not liked it there. He might, that's really what it is. He could have not liked the culture. He could have not liked the campus. He could have not liked the area, but he did. So it's not just the relationship. Like I said, I think he's a really good culture fit down there beyond just one coach and one, point of view on scheme fit and a point of view on developmental fit. There's a lot more that goes into it. Allen might have been the driving force, but if he wasn't comfortable with other things at Clemson, it wasn't going to happen because he had a lot of quality options elsewhere. Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame just threw its hat into the ring. I thought the Irish were going to be a real player there down the stretch. But Clemson's the choice. Really talented, hard-hitting player off the board. But, yeah, it's a multifaceted thing. Some things might have been placed ahead of other factors in terms of pecking order to get this one done, but it wasn't just one reason, that's for sure.
Yeah. Central Catholic, looking to the in-state recruiting trail now, has been a really solid pipeline for Penn State as of late. You brought in Peter Gonzalez and Anthony Specca from that program for the 2024 freshman class. They're both going to be redshirt freshmen this year. You got Xavier Thomas, defensive back, who came in with this 2025 group. And looking ahead to the 2026 class, Ashton Blatt is a key name to know. We've got him as a top 40 edge, top 12 player in the state of Pennsylvania at 24/7 Sports rankings. And look, they would have liked to have made it a tandem out of Central Catholic last class. You had Bradley Gomper as the linebacker, maybe an edge rusher down the road, ending up with Manny Diaz down at Duke. What do we make of Blatt and his decision to lock in an official visit and where things stand between him and the in-state Nittany Lions?
Well, first things first, solid prospect. He fits the profile of what Penn State looks for out of a pass rusher coming off the edge. He's locked in for that June 6th through the 8th official visit weekend, which is one of two weekends where Penn State is hosting the bulk of its top targets at the position. This is a really strong year, not only in the state, but in the region. And last year, we saw Deion Barnes go pretty much everywhere but the Northeast to get a pass rusher. It just wasn't there last cycle. That's not the case this year, not at all. The position is loaded. Blatt's one of those guys who he got his offer while he was on campus in February for his junior day visit. And it's taken off from there, really. He's maintained consistent contact with Deion Barnes. He's going to be back on campus during spring ball as well. Has an April 12th visit locked in with the Nittany Lions. Has a couple other officials on the docket as well. He's going to be at Duke late in June. I believe the final official visit weekend. He's going to get down to Durham, check out Manny Diaz, what he has going down there. And you mentioned Bradley Gompers sure there's with that familiarity, there's a draw there. Hughes is in the mix. West Virginia has an early official visit locked in with Blatt for April. So he's not short on quality suitors, but he's got that Penn State official visit locked in. And I'd say the Nittany Lions are really, really high on his list at this point in time.
Tyler Cavaruso, as you cover at Lions247.com, with all the latest visits being scheduled, those confirmations are coming in a hurry, and we're starting to get closer to that period where Penn State's going to be in host mode, spring practices. They'll get a bunch of prospects on campus. Going to be exciting to follow along with that. This is a 2026 recruiting class that, despite the recent loss of a wide receiver from the group, still top 10 nationally, number 8 in our rankings at 24/7 Sports. 8 commits currently on board. And among them, and this is where we'll finish our segment with you, Tyler, is Daniel Jennings, who is on the rise in 24/7 Sports rankings. He is inside the top 200 out of Princeton, West Virginia. He's a 4-star. And he is a really dynamic defender. I know, speaking about Tom Allen, as we were a moment ago, his dialogue with Jennings was about some positional versatility. Where is he right now in terms of a position fit with Penn State? And from what you've gathered and some of the conversations you've had within the network, why is he a riser in our rankings? More than 40 spots of a riser.
So we've both seen him camp, and the athleticism is impossible to miss. He's twitched up. He's quick coming off the line. The first step is really impressive. Just an overall really strong athlete with a ton of upside. That's the belief internally at Penn State and within our network here in terms of ranking. That played a big part into why he made a more than 40 spot jump. He's inside that top 200 now in our rankings. And really, the main takeaway I got was, look, he's still coming to his own as a pass rusher. We've seen the athletic traits. We've seen the testing numbers, but he's still continuing developing that tool set as a pass rusher. And the thought is he's only going to get better going into his senior year. He was highly impactful as a junior down in West Virginia, going both ways, playing running back and coming off the edge, just, again, showcasing that high-level athleticism that made him a top target coming off the edge for Deion Barnes. And look, this might not be it for Jennings in terms of rankings rising. I talked to some people who think he still has the ability to shoot up even further. So it was an early take for Penn State. It was thought of as a really good take at that time. I think it's a take now that's looking even better, because Jennings' stock is definitely on the rise. He has the potential to be one of those highly ranked pillars of this 26 class when it's all said and done. And frankly, he's already in that conversation. He's already in that realm.
Well, Tyler, we appreciate the catch up on recruiting. Unfortunately, some negative news to pass along and discuss there for the Nittany Lions. But in this world of recruiting, you never know when we're going to pop up with another episode where we got a lot of good stuff to discuss and the class is growing and all that. So stay tuned to Lions247.com. We'll get Tyler on for an upcoming episode as well. Penn State starts to build things out. We're clearly coming up a little closer to camp season. It's not just Penn State getting back on the field. It's prospects across the region getting back on the field. Tyler's going to be all over the place. We're going to get some here in State College before long too. So the calendar's starting to turn winter towards spring. We're with you every step of the way at Lions247.com. Tyler, good to get with you again. We'll talk real soon.
Yep. Thanks, man. It was great to be back.
All right, you'll hear from Tyler, Daniel, and the rest of our crew on upcoming episodes of the Lions 24/7 podcast. For now, I'm going to step aside and get back to work over on the site, Lions247.com. Good to be back with you. Check 2 episodes next week. This will be our only episode this particular week. I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.